And we are here with a outspoken and wonderful friend of mine to introduce to you all, Brian Greco. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I've had a lot of these talks where I've said let's compartmentalize COVID-19, but so much of what you do is about studying globalization, studying urbanism. So I've pivoted from what we originally discussed. We'll go in hardcore on it, talk about your vision of your life, your career, what cities are going to look like, all of these different subjects that, what was it, how many months ago in Seattle having bubble tea, we had a very similar discussion under totally different global health and geopolitical circumstances.
Absolutely.
So where are you? How have you been? I think you've split this. You were in New York and then now you're in Arizona. So talk about your progression through these months.
So I was in Turkey when everything was brewing in early March, and I was watching as countries were coming on the map. Turkey seemed to have this strange phenomenon where they avoided the initial chaos and a lot of the crazy initial lockdowns. But then third week of March, I decided to come back because I was starting to see when the borders were going like dominoes. And so I came back and I was in New York for the initial 6-8 weeks of everything. And it was a ghastly sight to see that city. Obviously, that was the original epicenter, as it were, at least in the States. And I've been seeing family now. I'm here in the suburbs, PA suburbs, kind of waiting out the summer and just monitoring, as we all are, when we can safely and effectively get back to traveling. But it's been a long few months for us all.
I think Turkey thought that they're what those clone perfumes where we're going to magically cover it, and I think there's thoughts that it helped, but I guess it couldn't do 100% effectiveness.
Well, one thing I love about Turkey is it's a remarkably so organized society itself, and the people are very innovative and kind of to take a great initiative with things, and actually the hospital system is very excellent in Turkey, in my opinion. And so I actually was kind of loving the fact that when this was first starting, I felt I was in the best place to be, because Asia was clamping down, and then Europe had its initial outbreak, and I was kind of there and just kind of waiting it out. And then when things started to get really hot, I just was like, I gotta get out for family reasons, not because I wanted to be in the US. In fact, when I landed in the US, I felt this wave of darkness come over me because I knew that it was my last time at the border for a while. So, but yeah, the Colonia I was using it, and people were, it was like as if nothing had happened in Turkey up until probably March 25th or 6th, actually.
Oh, wow. And I know you're a big Turkey fan, and even thinking of returning when circumstances allow. So talk about a little bit about who you are, where you spend your time, where you were planning to start your young career and post-college lifestyle before all this interrupted.
Yeah, so for anyone watching, I grew up on the East Coast. I went to NYU in New York City, and I work online, which is now no longer weird, but was slightly weird, although becoming obviously increasingly popular over the past few years. I do internet marketing and sales for different consulting companies in the US. And I basically have been on a mission to find where I belong in the world and where I enjoy. And I've kind of gravitated towards particularly Serbia and Turkey, as well as some places around the Middle East, and mostly in Eurasia. And I really just fell in love with Istanbul specifically, and I have spent a large amount of the past few summers there and going back and forth and really just basing around kind of the Turkish Airlines model of flying to more countries than any airline and just really loving that geographical base. And so, I was looking to get settled there anyway, and now that timeline has definitely accelerated because the new travel, at least in the immediate future, I'm not a big fan of all the new normals and all these terms, but as far as what's actually just practical is long-term stays, which is what I was starting to veer into anyway. I did a lot of whirlwind quick trips when I was in college. I would, do a weekend thing, try to use my spring breaks, my winter breaks. And I was enjoying that, and I don't regret a bit of it. In fact, if there was any regret, and this is something funny that perhaps somebody, watching this can relate to, if there was any regret around using my time, money, and energy traveling as much as I could for the past 5, 6 years, if there was any doubt that I should have been, spending time with, XYZ person, or doing, being more focused, or not spending the money or whatever, it's all out the window, because who knows if that level of and that quantity of travel will even be feasible in the immediate future, which I'm sure you've talked about a lot. So, I'm glad that I did those trips to get in that initial survey of, different parts of the world, and I'm grateful for those trips. But now I'm veering into those longer stays, and to me, that's where things are going to be at, as far as 3, 6 months in a place, and just getting to know, selecting a few countries which you have kind of a mastery around. And for me, that's absolutely Turkey. And then Serbia had seemed to be fairly resilient in terms of opening. And then obviously the past few days has seen some serious unrest all over Serbia. So I am likely be avoiding. I usually do every, summer in Belgrade is like one of my favorite things. I like to go there for a month, and that's totally out the window now. But I'm definitely veering towards just not settling, but having a clearer base in some of these larger or mid-sized countries where there's tons to do once you're in the borders. Because the biggest issue is just the border movement, and even some domestic travel restrictions. But with Turkey, there's so much to keep you occupied there for, God, even a lifetime just in that one country.
Absolutely. And we'll divert to Serbia for a bit, because you're saying summer in Belgrade, and I've only had one visit to Serbia, and it struck me of a traveler's conundrum of Belgrade sitting in the center, the hub, and all of the destinations and country really radiates out from that, which is a bit irritating if you're trying to make some comprehensive itinerary and not keep going back and forth. But to be based there, it's actually incredibly useful. So tell us about a summer in Belgrade.
Yeah, so I kind of I had it on my radar for a while, and obviously Eastern Europe has grown in popularity among people who like that slightly more available, quote, authentic. I don't love the word authentic, but for lack of a better word, authentic European kind of summer feel. It's a really great, very friendly culture. I love the Serbian people. The language is great. It's affordable if you're coming from a US dollar or euro type standpoint. And really, it's a very plug and play destination. So I really just fell in love with it, especially in the summer months, because it's got great sunsets, great weather, Southern Europe, Southeastern Europe, in general. But I really was focused on having, kind of a semi base there. I kind of see Serbia and Turkey as like peanut butter and jelly. They really do go nicely together. There's frequent flights on Turkish Airlines. Serbia kind of gives me that European charm. I'm not a big Western Europe guy. I'm not a huge, I've never even really spent time in, the Spain, France, Italy, Greece. Those types of things are just not my thing. And so I was going to kind of dovetail and just go back and forth with Serbia and Turkey. But Serbia, partly probably for political reasons, their election just happened. I think there was a real incentive to get the place opened up, people feeling some semblance of normalcy for a little while. And there was a great window actually from mid-June to up until past few days. And many people I'm sure have posted and been there, where they opened and there were flights to JFK. And I think those will continue, but who knows? And there was a great window where you could really do some travel just recently there. But I think it's hopefully once it blows over. I mean, Serbia to me is the most engaging, easiest to love particularly Eastern European country. And as far as the structure of the country, it is interesting because Belgrade is so different it's one of those countries. I call it a mononucleic country, where it's really just one city, and then it's like you're either in the city or you're in the not the sticks, because there are some lovely towns in Serbia, but equivalently there is not a major city. Novi Sad to the north obviously has some population base and is very well loved, very different culturally than southern Serbia. But I would love to eventually do some more road trips around Serbia, and there's a ton to see. But even just city center Belgrade, there's great nightlife, there's great restaurants, and so I've always really just found it to be self-contained, to be very enjoyable itself as a city.
Fantastic. And I recall from my visit that it was very refreshing, very pleasant. it didn't have that invaded by the Ryanair partying drunkards
Right.
feel of say Bratislava. And I was just checking. I have an index of the number of mojito bars. When it passes a certain threshold, that's not a good sign, and I'm not seeing more than a handful of results in Belgrade.
Yeah, it's very sophisticated. What people don't really realize is Belgrade is not, it's not Russian or Soviet feeling at all. It's
Mm,
not it's not really related at all to even the, people group all the kind of Slavic countries together and say, oh, it's like, must be like Poland or like you said, Bratislava, even Budapest. It sometimes raises comparisons to. It's very distinct, and it was the cultural center, obviously, of Yugoslavia, and it has its own flair to it. And I mean, I could go on and on about, but I really am. I've sold many people on it. It's just a really great place, but it definitely has a far more vigorous local population, especially in the city center, which is so hard to
mhm,
find these days in Europe. Most of the time, you're either looking at a totally tiny town, which you could quote finish in a day or two,
mhm,
or you're looking at one of these. To get into the globalization thing, you're looking at these heavily globalized city centers, which either you could argue are just Americanized, quite frankly. Like I think Budapest, there's a strong case for the downtown Budapest being just completely gentrified and Americanized. And
mm,
then you could also say, or it's just, the typical suspects, the H&Ms, the Zaras, United Colors of Benetton, tons of tourists,
mm,
just where it's just, you feel like you're in another copy and paste of your generic European city, especially as you get towards Western Europe. So Belgrade really has
mm,
avoided a lot of that. It's starting to veer into that direction. The Belgrade Waterfront Project was a big controversy, a lot of foreign investment money that went into it. And I don't really love how the city is changing. I don't know if that's because I'm attached to the good memories of the past, or because it's actually changing, quote, not for the better. But I think Belgrade is one of those really cool. If you're somebody who likes to see like the encounter with global forces, with like a kind of a country that was mostly closed, you can really see a lot of that in Belgrade, because you'll have those traditional buildings, and then you'll have something that was very recent, or something that is almost feels out of place in some ways, but is kind of transforming the water line and the shopping experiences and those types of things.
mm.
Belgrade's a really cool example of the transition of a city.
And for those that might be concerned that food in the region, they might have an idea that the food might not be to their taste. Speak to the food, both local as well as the international cuisine options.
Excellent dining in Belgrade. I'd say probably some of the best in Europe. I would put up I like mostly like mid-range alfresco type dining. I'm not into like super fancy, and I'm not really into like fast food. I really just like a normal local restaurant. And Belgrade has a surprising amount of international cuisine, considering, again, comparatively in the region, but also really excellent like pizza, excellent, traditional Serbian food is obviously abounding. There's typical suspects like Vapianos and stuff are starting to pop up and have it feel more globalized, like I was saying. But there's great Mexican food in Belgrade. There's a lovely ramen place. So like it's really the kind of place where you feel like you are simultaneously enjoying Serbia, but also kind of having those tastes of global life as well. It's balanced it more beautifully, I think, than most cities have been able to do. And so that's cool. And vegetarian options, I see the question.
Mhm.
Lots in Belgrade. I still eat, mostly plant food options, and I really love, like I said, there's great Mexican food, a lot of build your own. There's even a build your own salad bar in downtown Belgrade, which is pretty remarkable for the Balkans, all things considered. There's like excellent Italian food. There's quite a few Arab, Middle Eastern restaurants popping up in Belgrade. So definitely keep it on your radar, especially now, because although Serbia is I would hold off on Serbia for a few weeks. Once the dust starts to settle, it really is, to me, one of the last gems in Europe.
And the red tape, as far as we'll set aside the current situation, but in terms of how long you can stay, getting actual visas or just in and out, Airbnbs, what's the mode?
Low drama, 90-day visa free for US, and I think for most 90 of 180, it has a Schengen style visa
Mm-hmm.
for most, you could say tier A, tier B passports, and also pretty welcoming for I mean, like, for example, there's a huge Tunisian tourist population, a lot of Indian tourists. It's actually visa free for China, which is interesting. Serbia-China relations are pretty strong. And I've never been, but it's the kind of place where if you're frustrated with bureaucracy, and again, mostly from an expat standpoint, I obviously hear different things from people who are living there. There can be some challenges long-term living there, but as it goes for travel, easy stamp in the passport, almost always Airbnbs. You're looking at 25, 35 a night US for a killer. That's one of the, to me, the biggest aspects of Belgrade. You can really have a great apartment for very low cost. And it's not a skimpy, tiny apartment. It's, you can get a 1-2 bedroom city center place for really affordable rates. And it's a great 3-monther type place. So all my recommendations for Belgrade.
Well, since everybody's thinking this is sponsored by the Belgrade Tourism Bureau, I'll add I know people will groan that I'm using a chain hotel reference, which wouldn't be my normal, but it was a business trip, and I was at the Crown Plaza Belgrade, and the lounge there, I've never seen a lounge go to more lengths to display proudly local breakfast items with elaborate options, all these placards saying which part of the country it's from, what the ingredients, what the history, this is organic, this is from this. I mean, it was really incredible, because the standard chain hotel breakfast around the world is the British breakfast, with some minor variations and hopefully some local fruit. And that detail really, really impressed me.
Yeah, you share my love of hotel breakfast, obviously. So I'm lamenting, the changes that may be imminent with hotel breakfast. But no, Serbia, the food quality is excellent, and it's cheap. And there's a very vibrant domestic food production. So you got great fruit, great cheeses. There's a big, obviously, the rakia from that region is, I don't drink that, but that's huge. And there's quite a few. There's a lovely Hyatt Regency. So anyone chain oriented, personally, I think the best way for Belgrade is just the Airbnbs, because they're so cheap. But if you do want to go hotel, there's a lovely hotel called Saint 10, which I think is a Hyatt managed property boutique. There's a beautiful new Hilton downtown. So you've got really the whole, and the airport is very zippy. I love Belgrade Airport because it's old school, where it is security at the gate. So it's kind of Tegel-esque. But not as much of a ridiculous clown show as Tegel, and really has just you're in and out in 10 minutes. And Air Serbia, I think, is great for regional for Europe. So yeah, Belgrade is it's a foolproof destination, and it's always a good time. And I really do hope that things are able to spring back, because it's a place I truly enjoy. So.
You called it was that mononucleic country?
Yeah, I have a theory with cities of countries, and I haven't published this yet, but it's something I'm thinking about, which is around where does the energy come in the powerhouse of the country. And so you've got some countries, to rattle off a few, Azerbaijan is, it's Baku, or it's tiny cities, or Mongolia is a great example of mononucleic. It's Ulaanbaatar, or it's literally the steppe, And then you've got countries that I would call like either dinucleic, which would be like, what's a country that's dinucleic? So Portugal, I would consider dinucleic, which you've got Porto, and basically between Porto and Lisbon. And then you've got polynucleic, which would be, China, India, Brazil, just bigger countries. But even like Germany is polynucleic. There's so many major population centers. And then you've got like subsets of that. Like I think the United Kingdom arguably is, mostly London centric, but then you've still got a fair amount of major cities. I think, something like Northern Ireland is mononucleic. It's either Belfast or, so it's something fun to think about with like cities, what's important population wise. Obviously not like morally. I mean, there's beautiful natural sites, but I'm mostly focused on cities because I don't drive, and I'm usually traveling by myself. So I like somewhere where I can see a lot in the city, and it's kind of fun to think about those different structures of a country.
Yeah, my mind went to in the duo or poly, where there's second cities or third cities, but then there's also ones where there's the political capital and the economic capital are very separate. And it's fascinated me in terms of U.S. states. if you
Yes.
look at the states of just how often the political capital is not the economic capital. And I think that's probably fairly rare around the world. I mean, when I lived in China, I mean, it's very clear that the provincial capital is the economic capital, and it's of each province, and it's oriented around that. And where I'm sitting in Washington State, how many people know know where the capital is, and it's what I don't know I don't even know where it is in the population. Probably like the fifth biggest city in the state. It's an afterthought in terms of what people conceive of the state in many respects.
Absolutely. But, that's where you get to see it's a lens into the politics. I mean, I think the rise of particularly the planned capital city, which is something I really think is fun. Something like, I spent a month in Islamabad last year. Islamabad, totally planned city. If you're interested in urbanization, or you're interested in architecture, or you're interested in whatever, honestly, a planned city is a great way to see the aspirations and the challenges of a country. You can see, for example, in Ankara, the narrative of the revival of the Anatolian identity of Turkey, and the desire to place important government buildings and so forth away from the traditional megacity of a country. Again, Karachi versus Islamabad, even Lahore versus Islamabad, and then like with Turkey, Istanbul is still the juggernaut city of Turkey. But then you've got Ankara, and then you've got, I mean, some countries have tried more kooky examples like Naypyidaw in Myanmar, which I haven't been yet, but like, super interesting planned cities. There's even talks of Indonesia creating a planned capital away from Jakarta because it's just become so congested. There's other examples. I mean, still certain countries retain, like Malaysia is arguably mononucleic. I mean, there are some semi-important cities in Malaysia, but it's very KL focused. But I love to see plans like Brasilia is a great example of a really wild plan. I haven't been yet, but I'd really like to see some of the kind of retro architecture and whatnot that they have there. And you get to see like, what does the government want to show to the world to see? So, and Chandigarh. So sorry, I see the comment there. I don't know.
Yeah, that was one of what I was thinking. So Chandigarh's in India, a planned city.
Right.
Not a major center, but a fascinating planning example.
Yes, or what's the small city in Germany that's planned? Mannheim is another, like it's a planned. There's a lot of planned cities. Nur Sultan, FKA Astana, is a favorite city of mine in Kazakhstan because.
So that's a regret of mine. I've not been.
You're missing out.
A 5-stand trip I took one summer when I was living in Beijing. I spent the trip the least amount of time in Kazakhstan, so only Almaty and surrounding areas, and down into Kyrgyzstan. So make me regret even more how much I'm missing and need to get out there.
Happy to do so, because Astana, I still call it Astana, and so does everyone who lives there. But Astana rocks. I really, and again, it's based on your taste. A lot of people would say, "Oh, it's so gaudy," or "It's so boring," but I'm mostly focused on the lens into modernity and the lens into politics and society that travel can give. And I think it's cool. And I think Nur Sultan, I mean, not to mention, I think Astana, Nur Sultan has found itself quite nicely in terms of the soft product, if you could, meaning the restaurants, the cultural institutions. It is very eclectic, and it's, there's all those Illuminati theories about the arrangement of the different buildings and the strange symbols. But as far as planned cities go, it's very cool, because I feel very relaxed in Nur Sultan, because you've got so much space and the airport's very new. The streets are very clean, but it also doesn't feel totally sterile, because there's also a risk of it being a ghost town, like the Myanmar example, or even Brasilia, people say, has almost nothing really to it besides some buildings and museums. But I think Astana did a really good job, and Islamabad as well. Islamabad is an extremely, maybe we can veer into some Pakistan fanboy stuff, because I'm absolutely an unabashed Pakistan fanboy, and Islamabad is a really underrated, I think, travel destination, but also just expat living wise. It's very very green, very safe, and very organized, and I really enjoy it.
And that totally stunned me. Sometimes I do a ton of research before a destination. Other times I other than getting there, I just wanted to surprise me. And in Islamabad, I had no concept, so I came in overland from India to Lahore. Lahore fit a lot more of my image of what Pakistan might be like, and then overland got. By the time I got to Islamabad, I said, "This is nothing like what I expect in the region." I didn't. I spent a few days and went out to Taxila and that, and I really like walkable cities. And between the heat and the space and the greenery, it didn't leap out to me as a walkable city. So tell me what all I've missed and why I
In
should be a
Islamabad,
fanboy in Islamabad. Yeah.
yeah, so it's definitely not walkable except for in certain sub-regions. So Islamabad is very gridded, and the
Mhm.
neighborhoods have retained these slightly medicalized, E11, G6, all these different. So it's cool, and if you kind of just roll with it and say, okay, so this is a planned city. Rawalpindi obviously surrounds it, which is much more of that Lahore type city, much
Mhm. Mhm.
much less urban planning, but also interesting. And what I like about Islamabad, even though it's not walkable, Uber and Careem are so well dialed in there, where you're looking at 50-cent Ubers anywhere 2 minutes away. I mean, I lived in Ubers as far as transferring around the city, and then once you're in in the in the markaz, the center of each block, you've got
Mhm.
shopping, restaurants, and city life in there. And so I was mostly
Okay.
back and forth. Yeah, it's actually quite, if once you're in the little area. So I was in. To me, F8 is the best place to stay in Islamabad. That's the
Okay.
best block, and then G6 is great for restaurants and so forth. So there's a lot, or was it a couple months ago? E6,
F8. So I'm adding these to the notes. So F8 to stay, G6 to eat,
yeah, and it was either E6 or I think it's G6. Let me try.
G6
Oh,
to
it's
eat.
E. Oh, F6 as well. Sorry, F6 is where I get, you start to forget all the letters. But yeah, F6, the whole six area is pretty nice. And then you're looking at, there's an area called the Blue Area, which has a lot of restaurants as well. So Islamabad is a total surprise to people, especially because Pakistan obviously has been pushing against this image of the world's most dangerous nation for years, and I think within the community here and within a lot of travelers, um, the L6 here. It's yeah. So within a lot of travelers, people start to know that Pakistan is really an excellent destination in all
Mhm.
respects. But and I lament the fact that here they are finally making a real big wave with tourism. Oh, my ring light just went off. And then this all happened. So I think that they'll hopefully rebound. Just give me 1 second. Plug this back in.
Mhm. The
Yeah.
beautify ring. Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. There's your glow again. Yeah, I mean, Pakistan is one of different reactions to the countries, and as I start to summarize them in my head, it's one of the fewer that my first thought was I'd like to bring my parents here, so not just revisit myself, but bring them as well, and show that it does defy expectations, negative portrayals. There's so much, and an incredibly diverse country as
Yeah.
well. I mean, I've only been to the two major centers and connected the dots between them, and there's tons more I would like to see.
Absolutely.
And has the visa gotten easier? I went. I'm trying to think 6 7 years ago, where it took a lot of effort in New York
Yeah.
to get it, and it had to do something with recent appearance of U.S. helicopters over one particular household. So I didn't blame them for a
Yeah.
little caution about an American with a thick passport, but
Exactly, and Islamabad being only about 60 miles from various activity, but still, Pakistan has made itself relatively open to the world.
mm,
Um, there has been a visa liberalization over the past, I think it was either 2018 or 2019,
okay.
where they were really doing the e-visa system. Obviously, with Pakistan, love them as they do, there is always an extra step with a lot of things, and so I did have to go through the LOI thing, but it's very, again, speaking from 6 8 months ago, LOI I think was just honestly a money grab. It was a $75. Everybody knows in this group that LOI can often just be a way to keep everybody's visa agencies in business. So
Yeah.
$75, and
I
No,
know
no.
my first one, it turned out they wanted what was it, like the owner of the company, his ID copy, and then it was like, what did he send? And then it turned out then the business license had expired like a week before, so they're like, oh, until they finish renewal, which could be who knows when, then you get another. Yeah, I can went through a few rounds like that.
Yeah, but no issues at arrival. I mean, I did
Yeah.
have to verify the visa at some desk, and 6 guys with AK-47s had to look at my thing. But it was not. That doesn't sound. It's not as bad as it sounds. It was just the typical entry process, and really graceful. Very just an excellent country. I just have so much respect for Pakistan. And then as far as nightlife, I saw the
Mhm.
question. Not a I don't drink anyway, so because you said dry country. So if you mean nightlife regarding alcohol, that would be in private residences. Um, I do think high-end hotels, I don't really pay attention to that, but from what I recall, high-end hotels offered spirits, wine and spirits for if you were at the hotel premises, and then but plenty of nightlife as far as food, friends, something to see, music. Um, Islamabad obviously being more tame, but Lahore is a 24-hour city for sure. Um,
Mhm.
and I certainly had, I have to say, and I consider myself a lover of cities and I don't mind a lot of stimulation. Lahore was absolutely the most profound assault on the senses that I have ever experienced. Even putting not necessarily different than India, but just very. I consider, and I don't mean this in any political sense, but I consider Lahore far more like India because it is, quite frankly, more culturally related to because
Mhm.
due to its proximity, but also just the structure of the city is far more. It's just very different from the rest of the country, and Lahore was um, a real journey. But
Mhm.
I did enjoy it and very fun, very outgoing people. They really want to show you the place, and I had a great time there. But as far as nightlife, you will not be bored. If you're bored in Lahore, I don't know what to tell you.
Have you been to either Kathmandu or Dhaka?
I haven't yet. Dhaka's high on my list. I do like traveling mostly to Muslim countries, interestingly, but I'd also like to go to eventually. I've avoided Nepal mostly because I'm not into the Everest hiking thing. And I'm sure there's plenty, obviously, to see that isn't that. But I tend to lower prioritize countries which are mostly centric around a certain tourist site because I just am so jaded with all of that I like to go to. I just like to be purposely different and go to weirder places.
I'm curious the assault on the census comparison, Lahore to Dhaka. So we'll take a
Oh,
rain check to see your vote. And
Dhaka, I've heard.
my week in Dhaka was during the Durga Puja festival. So it was particularly ramped up for the population celebrating that.
Lovely.
But yeah, that's incredible. And um, thinking of back to these polynucleic or duonucleic cities. Let's land in Turkey, and if we're flying Turkish, you put that as your favorite airline. It's maybe my number one with Korean Air that is my wife's favorite. So I'll
You're
do
Korean.
that. But talk about why it's your favorite airline. I've got very specific reasons, and I'm curious if ours line up.
So to me, if you're a serious traveler, and I feel comfortable using that term here because it's in the description of the group, if you're a serious traveler, you're looking at something where you can go one stop to as many places as possible. Obviously, a Heathrow and a JFK always will have a certain amount, but there's nuance, there's complications to that anyway. And so you're looking at middle of the world stuff. And I used
Mhm.
to be a diehard Emirates fan. I used to be Mr. UAE, obviously, not obviously, but that changed for me. I'm no longer geared towards there for a variety of reasons, but and especially now it's mostly an impractical base. But I did my flurry over the Gulf Airlines, had a good time flying them, but ultimately, to me, Turkish Airlines, not only from the fact that it has the most countries, not only from the fact that it's a killer, awesome opener to all of Europe. I mean, Turkish Airlines stronghold is still narrow body to Europe, right?
Mhm.
But also, you're looking at 10 hours instead of 12 to 14 to the US, multiple dailies to so I'm, still JFK centric for, going to see family and so forth. Much less hassle entering Europe and the US because of closer relations. And as far as the airline itself, I mean, again, forgetting the fact that you can fly to anywhere, that it's usually pretty, you can really double up on destinations with multi-cities and get some great rates. I've had some weird open jaw tickets where I did KL to, KL to Istanbul, stopover, open jaw later on, Amsterdam to JFK and back. And I've had these really crazy itineraries that come out to really great rates. So you got to play around with that. But as far as onboard service, the crew in Turkish Airlines to me is the most consistently excellent. Partially, maybe slightly biased because I just love Turkey, but also, and it does help to speak a little bit of Turkish, especially with some of them. But just, I mean, attractive crew, timely, always so professional, so globally minded, but still very distinctly Turkish. I don't work for Turkish Airlines, but I could. And just, I mean, the Biz product, I was so fortunate to try that before everything changed with all the little plasticky stuff now. But you're looking at I consider Turkish Biz dining on par with global first of anything. I would put it up against La Prem. I'd put it up against Cathay F. I'd put it up against anything because the food is just so excellent, partially because Turkish food is just so good and partially because they cater it so professionally and the presentation is amazing. But even if you're in economy, always comfortable, very Airbus heavy fleet, which I like. I like it. I like a 330 for economy and a fair amount of 777, which is a good workhorse for the long haul stuff. But Turkish is it's just always good. And Istanbul airport, the new airport took some time for me to love. I'm not going to lie, first impression.
Talk about the new airport. I haven't experienced it.
Yeah, so they rushed that thing, and good for them because, again, the counter example being, Schönefeld, or what's the new German airport that's been under construction for 20 years. But yeah, I mean, it's a stunning airport. It's a little sterile feeling. They could have done, I think, a lot more design-wise, but it's this mega building, kind of like Dashing apparently is, and it's just the biggest criticism of it, which I thought was valid, is that if you're on one end and you need to go the other, you can be up to 25 minutes of like steady walking. There's really no connectivity. There's no internal train system. But in some ways, it actually makes it easier because once you're in, you're in. So if you're connecting airside, you really can do anything you need to do. And also what I love is it's a very fast flow right into the airport when you're checking in. There's obviously check-in security, then check-ins. Yeah, passport there's never a line at the new. There's like 35 passport things open, and baggage claim is always effortless. It's a little far from the city, and there's no public transport, but they're working on that. But yeah, I mean, to me, Turkish Airlines is just the most sophisticated and power user friendly. Like you can really use that airline to go anywhere you want to go. And I know when I step on Turkish Airlines that I can expect that it'll be a good flight. There's full breakfast on 75-minute flights in Europe. I mean, it's just the baggage allowance is so much more generous. It really is, to me, the gold standard.
I love it. The main reason, actually, I agree with all of those points, and I've never experienced their business class. I've had many economy class flights, and I overeat. It's one where it's like, oh, can you have the lemon juice drink, and can you have the Arya, and there's a rose drink. I'm forgetting all just the different drinks on an economy class drink card.
Yeah, there's cherry juice. It was good.
Cherry juice, yeah, not rose, yeah, cherry. And so I try all of them and then cycle back through. And but my feeling of it is, you mentioned the Middle Eastern carriers, and I have the ME3. I have the least. I've flown Emirates 2 long haul flights, Qatar short haul flights, and Etihad a little mix. And I technically I think they're all good, but I feel that about them a bit like how I feel visiting a casino in Vegas, where it just feels the level of artifice. It just feels like it's so explicit that it's created for that experience, and I feel like the interactions are only at that superficial level, whereas an airline like Turkish is unabashedly totally Turkish experience, and you get a full cultural experience, whether you like it or not. You're getting a real Turkish experience, and that I really appreciate to have on an airline, not so much the generic bland international service concept.
Yeah, and I think that can be said, again, not to go on an Emirates bashing moment, because I think Emirates does a lot of things really impressively, or did, but the crew in Turkish, it feels like they actually kind of care, which is nice. And they also, like you said, they incorporate elements of the Turkish culture, but also so beautifully cater to a huge variety of. I mean, I always have said that the United Nations really should be in Turkey, because Turkey is this. It has this amazing crossover effect where you've got a real easy leg into Europe, you've got an extensive map into Africa, which is something that so many airlines have failed to sufficiently invest in, and then you've also
Mhm.
got 10 hours straight to 5,000 miles direct to Hong Kong, and then KL. There's excellent connections, and then what you're also doing is easy to US. You've got a couple to South America. That's one of their lowest points, mostly because of the geography. But then you've also got regional Middle East. So I mean, when you're looking at going to, and I'd like to start spending time eventually into Iran and Afghanistan and those types of countries, you're looking at either going through Dubai or Turkey. I mean, there's really nothing direct from
Mhm.
anywhere. And I just feel the most comfortable choosing Turkish as that gateway. And you really have, I mean, what other airline can you go from San Francisco to Shiraz, Iran in one stop? I mean,
Mhm.
very few. I mean, maybe Frankfurt, but I despise Frankfurt Airport. So, I mean, it really is. You can launder your trip a little bit by going through Turkey and going from wherever else. Not to use that word.
I'll give the Air Canada Lounge in Frankfurt my thumbs up, and I'll say nothing about the Z gates. So that's
Don't even. I had a couple nightmares in Frankfurt the past few months. So I don't prefer not to talk
well, we'll leave it there. We do want to hear more about Turkey on the ground, and that's one that I have visited so many times in terms of transits and never counted it because it was such a special place that finally, a few years ago, I had about 12 days and took a road trip from Van in the east all the way
about
across the country of just through the southern line, through the Kurdish areas up the coast that way. So the northern half of the country, I haven't seen it all. Still saw a tremendous amount, and it's one of the few places that I would like to live for a period of time. So again, another one you don't need to sell me on, but sell the group, and specifically if you think it's maybe people are worried, is it going to be chaotic, difficult to live there? Talk about how you're able to pop in and out for your
Yeah.
lifestyle.
So Turkey is now. I'm mostly Istanbul centric at this point. I have not visited I've been to Izmir as well. I've spent a lot of time in Istanbul, and I've always been meaning to start venturing out towards where you were mentioning Van and all these other cities. I'd really like to get to Konya. I'd like to get to Mardin and Mersin. I'd like to get to the Black Sea. So what I love about Turkey is, in some ways, and I don't mean this in anything other than just to think about a cool analogy, is like it kind of is like the US, to the extent that you've got so much in this country. You've got like beach life on one corner. You've got mountains. You've got Black Sea, which is totally different. You've got like central cities. So as far as a place to live, I want something where there's enough, like I said, in the country where you can really enjoy, and there's also enough connectivity. And so it's a tough balance, because you want something that feels like you're really somewhere and that you're not just in, a shopping mall all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with malls,
Mhm.
but I like that Turkey gives you enough to work through. And so as far as the challenges, I think there's been an image. I'm a big proponent of changing the perception that Turkey is in any way remotely related to something which would be this like old world, dusty old country, which is vast and exotic. And it's absolutely not. I mean, obviously, there are historical sites in Turkey, and there are parts of it that are less developed than others. But Turkey has a very robust population. It's a very robust population. It has a very robust domestic manufacturing sector. It's a major middle power as far as military and political goes. It's a huge leader in the Middle East, and you've got so much new investment in the real estate of Turkey, as well as facilities like roads, hospitals, and so forth. The infrastructure is really excellent. The transport in Istanbul, to me, is world class. And obviously the airport I talked about. And I do want to give a shout out to the comment about the Istanbul airport, the lounge, which is killer for Stargold or for Biz. It's
Mhm.
so good. Even the new one. I mean, the one in Ataturk was amazing with that famous uh, Earth thing that they had in there, and the self playing piano. But the new one is really really beautiful. But yeah, I mean, Turkey is very pro expat. It's pro business country. Obviously, the lira and some political things have happened where Turkey has had some economic struggles. So it's no paradise in terms of macroeconomics or whatever. But as far as if you're looking at a place to live, again, coming from a traveler or expat standpoint, you can get a great place in Turkey. You can buy an apartment outright for as low as sometimes 30 to 50K. And then if you're looking to get like a villa or something on the beach, you can find a beachfront property well under 100,000 and get a residence permit with any real estate purchase, no minimum threshold. And you can also get citizenship for 250 grand of real estate. So if you want a backup passport, I mean, it's a major country to be able to just invest in like that. And they have such an open door, and they always have. I mean, the history of especially Istanbul is a crossroads. I mean, that word is overused so often in tourism. It's east and west, and it's a crossroads. But if there's anything that's a crossroads, it's Istanbul. I mean, you're literally straddling the tectonic plates. And what I love is that it's just this beautiful analogy of going from Europe to Asia. I mean, it's just so much fun to be able to take a taxi between continents. And you've got so many facilities built in to welcome. I mean, Turkey has been very welcoming also to a lot of Middle Eastern investors, where they would be usually rejected in places like London or the rest of Europe. It's just an easy place you can buy property, you can stay there for 90 days with a $20 e-visa. So it's very plug and play.
I didn't realize it was quite that accessible, and the transport network. I love. I booked this for a few days. At the end of my trip, I stayed at this Hampton Inn that was like on the 5,000 points a night Hilton thing, and it was near this awesome light rail line, the Marmaray. And
was it the?
I was trying to explain to the staff how cool the name sounded to me. I'm thinking like Marmaray, like cool. Like the manta rays, but they have a totally different meaning. But it was even though I stayed in the suburbs, it was incredibly accessible to hop in and out, and as well as drive around the city, because I did have a rental car that I came in on the city and then parked it and used public transport while I was in. But really, really incredible and impressive. And I can certainly say I've never been more impressed with a museum pass in any place. And they've got the Istanbul, they've got the regions. I got the countrywide one, which I forget, it was like $35 or something, and it truly covered, I think, in the entire trip, everything but one or two sites that I wanted to visit. One was one of the museums at Gallipoli, and one I'm forgetting somewhere else. But all the biggest highlights museums around the country, just flash the pass, you're in. I mean, all these UNESCO sites. It wasn't like the typical museum pass that has 8 wax museums and not the one Masters Museum that you really want to see.
I know. No, it's unfathomable, the quantity. I mean, most people, it just flies right over their head how great Turkey is, and again, that's fine. They can have fun in Italy and Spain and France, but as far as the quantity you get for your money and the amount you can do there, and I actually have stayed at that Hilton. If we're thinking of the same, it's the Hampton Inn in Zeytinburnu. Is that the one? The 5?
Yep.
That one's no longer 5,000. They raised it to 10. But I lived there for a whole month one summer on Hilton.
I calculated I could spend about 5 months there on my Hilton bill, and I was ready to book it.
They upgraded me, and it was free breakfast. And I had a great time at that hotel. I love the people at the front desk at the hotel. But yeah, I mean, there's killer Hiltons all over Turkey. I could go on and on.
I used so many Hilton, and it wouldn't be my normal, but it was these that were so cheap that it was 5,000 points a night for these luxury spots, and that compared to spending $40 a night, it was easier. Yeah, we've got a lot of the points travelers popping in and saying hello, so we have to give them a little vegetarian meat on the bone of what point stuff are you doing or not doing? What's happening to your trip planning now?
Me, as far as points, so
yeah,
I've shifted out of the points game a lot. I mean, I hate to pack it in, but honestly, I really feel, and I've felt this for a while, that there's been I think the points game was mostly fun, not to sound like a Debbie Downer, but it was more fun when it was kind of a little more scrappy and behind the scenes. It became very commercialized, and I get that, because it is a great. I mean, the reason these programs exist is not for public utility; it's because they are loyalty and business generating mechanisms. But in general, I just found that there was such. I mean, with the exception of maybe a few programs, I think Hilton has remained pretty generous. I think that diamond status through that Amex card was having top tier status for holding a credit card alone with no spend requirement was just changed the elite status game for hotels. I think U.S. airlines are just a total clown show at this point that it's almost preposterous to even compare the programs because they're just so bad. Like I have no issues just completely like it's just so bad. I mean, flying in the U.S. compared
they're not as bad as the U.S. as a lot of the European programs. It seems like the European programs got bad first.
But I mean, I'm not even programs, but just the flying experience in the US.
Yeah.
So it's like trying to make going through a meat grinder less painful. It's just almost like I'm like I don't even care because especially now with post-COVID, it's so uncomfortable. The service is so minimal. The airports are so dilapidated most around the US. I mean, I don't want to go on that whole thing, but I just find those programs, especially with min spend requirements, and then once everything went rev based for earnings, I mean that was out the door. And then I think you can still milk. I continue to believe that Star Alliance is still the only real serious alliance globally. Again, I am biased because it does happen to have Turkish as well as Singapore and Lufthansa, so it is to me the most workhorse alliance. But in general, I don't pay attention to it much. I've always said I never fly to earn. I would never pick something over something just because of earnings if there were other factors at play. I think for hotels, Hilton is really the only one I have any retained interest in. SPG, rest in peace, was a big thing. I think Marriott, I think that just that conglomerate of a mess of whatever 72 brands it is just a total joke at this point. I mean, maybe there's some sweet spots in there, but I have no interest in pouring through that program. And then I think you can still find, if you're US centric, you can still find a couple like smaller scale, like 2 and 3 star hotel chains that you can milk really nicely in terms of points. But I don't follow that anymore. I've always geared more towards Airbnb, which has still no loyalty program. And if there was, I'd definitely be platinum lifetime, whatever on that website. But they've really been kind of skimpy with loyalty program, but I don't care because if you're staying $25 a night somewhere, it's such a great value that I would just so much rather do that. I think there's certain redemptions that are still good for different hotels, but I'm still on the CSR game as far as 3X for travel and dining. I do have the Hilton Aspire for MX Aspire for, which has some pretty generous supermarket earnings, and they were really agile with making the resort credit be credited towards any U.S. restaurant, which I thought was really nice. So Hilton's been, like I said, Hilton's one of the few I think that's remained pretty generous. But yeah, European programs are mostly a joke. Most Asian programs are totally not even worth crediting to for airlines. And yeah, I think the heyday of it, not to burst anyone's bubble, is kind of over, at least as far as my patience level with going through all of it. But I still think there's always those hidden gems. But I'd much rather focus on finding really good fares on my favorite airlines, cash, putting them on a solid card for earnings, either getting cash back or just sticking with, a couple transfer partners and then just keeping it simple. That's kind of my philosophy at this point.
How do you find good fares? And then we'll be specific on Turkish. You mentioned finding very elaborate fares. So what are the tools you use finding these?
Yeah, I'm still a Google Flights guy. Google Flights, the new version ever since a few years, is a little slower to use. ITA Matrix is always helpful for checking some things. But for Turkish, there's a lot of multi-city fares that you can play around with on Google Flights that are not searchable on Turkish Airlines. So you end up having to book them on Expedia or Priceline, which is not a huge deal, but it can be a pain when you're trying to change them, especially in post-COVID travel.
I was going there because Turkish has, I think it's the same backend that a lot of airlines like Korean have. The website is just a fight to accomplish anything.
Yeah, multi-city on Turkish Air does not work, the website. But yeah, I mean, I just search around and I don't go nuts anymore with it. I just try to find a solid fare and keep it. I like to nest tickets so that I'm reducing my risk of missing a leg and having, I don't like, as much as I do like a good open jaw occasionally, I like to do things where like, I get to Istanbul from wherever, and then I'm doing regional. You can find some really good fares regionally in Central. And also Air Astana is another favorite of mine because for Central Asia and even into deeper Asia, you can find really good fares on Air Astana as well.
Oh, and for those that don't know the lingo, so explain the concept of nesting a ticket.
So what I like to do is buy a ticket where I'm like, I get to Turkey and then like 6 months later, I know I'm going back to the US. So I'll put that ticket and then I'll put stuff in between those. And like, for example, when I was in Pakistan, or when I did a big Stans trip, I did a big Turkish Airlines ticket to and from Pakistan to the US. And then I put a couple one ways here and there. I just like to reduce the risk that it's also cheaper, but it's just like if you miss one leg or if something goes wrong with the ticket, that you don't have everything riding on. Like, people are big fans of these round the world tickets and all these big multi leg trips. I think the best thing to do is if you've got an over the ocean flight, get that settled, and then get some regional budget airlines and whatnot, and stick it in the schedule.
Fantastic. That's hoping to be able to play with those. I've lost all motivation to plan travel. I don't think it's realistic for me or responsible for me, so I'm not planning anything and not worrying about having to cancel stuff. But I'm in a position where I actually this year was intending to try to break a bit of the travel addiction and focus on work and projects that I've sidelined just by exhaustion from travel. You're in your cohorts in a very different position. I'm curious first about your experience with NYU Shanghai, NYU Abu Dhabi, and then what advice can you impart to your fellow age cohort in terms of plans interrupted?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm glad I made it to the key level of at least getting through college without this. I really feel for especially class of 2020. But I think the big thing is focus on a region or a couple countries that you really want to get to know. I think language learning has been a big piece of that for me, especially I've studied Chinese. I know you obviously speak Chinese. I think it's fun to select a culture that you really are attracted to for whatever reason, and to try to find study opportunities there. Obviously, Europe has a long history of Erasmus programs and exchange programs, free master's programs in Scandinavia. I had considered going to do maybe a master's in the UK, which is a really popular option. But to pick something where you just really get to know that place, and that you're kind of diversifying your bases a little bit. I mean, I think these days, especially if you're from the US, I'm of the opinion, not to go down that whole rabbit hole, but of the opinion that the US is really on the is a sinking ship, for lack of a better word. And I think it's important to have as much as you possibly can, to have familiarity with different regions of the world. So for me, travel has never just been so much about like, that was really fun, and then like come back and just kind of like, toss it in the photo album, but like to really build a sense of like what's out there, and to meet people, and to build friendships and those types of things. And so I think the best thing that, for lack, I don't know what advice to give anyone. I mean, it's up to each individual situation, but I think to find a country you really resonate with, and then to try to dovetail some travel into your university studies if you can. NYU is great to the extent that it has 2 campuses abroad, like you mentioned, Shanghai and Abu Dhabi, and they're totally integrated with the school. So you can be taking classes, and it's not even like it's an exchange where you got to get the transfer the credits and stuff. It's just literally like NYU soil in these countries. And a lot of universities have started to adapt that model, especially in the Middle East and in Asia. But yeah, there's always options. There's Japanese teaching programs. There's a ton. And so I think to not do something just because you feel like you have to do it because it's the next logical step, but to really investigate what opportunities are out there.
It's incredible, and I hope that those options will be open for today's students. Yeah, what really resonated with me is your comment about picking a language or culture where you really have some resonance. And I've tried to add Spanish, and it just doesn't click with me. And I've enjoyed the countries I've visited. I've been to every Spanish-speaking language country in the world, so yeah. I've enjoyed it. It just has never been to that point of I'm really excited to hunker down and learn the language. And I realize I'm just thinking about it as a practical tool rather than something I love. So I think if I do pick something up, it might be Korean or Japanese, where I have that more affinity for the history and experience with it, and forget thinking about, is it immediately broadly practically actionable, as much as something that I would just really enjoy.
Yes. And in fact, sometimes the more specific and less, quote, useful the language or whatever is, the more enriching it can be, because then you're really given an invitation to dig into a a new culture that isn't just, oh, I'm learning Spanish because it's the most spoken language or whatever. Like I studied Uzbek. I don't know if I ever told you that story. I studied Uzbek because I was really bored one summer, and there was an Uzbek language program at ASU, and I fell in love with Phoenix from going there. But and then I went to Uzbekistan this past year, finally made it over, and it was just so much fun to like apply those. I mean, they were rusty knowledge, but the language learning experience. So learn Basque, learn Armenian, learn Georgian, learn whatever. Do something where you can really dive in, and especially in a post-COVID globalizing world, there is a retraction in connectivity. So if you can have depth as we wait until we can have breadth and access again, that's the best move, I think, right now, is to just be where you need to be and take care of yourself and take care of your family and take care of your health, and just learn and build those skills so that when things do eventually be hopefully become more accessible again, you'll really be able to hit the ground running.
And you say you're learning 5 different languages: Turkish, Farsi, Arabic, Mandarin, and Cantonese during quarantine. How are you learning? What tools, what methods, and how are you juggling multiple ones?
So that's how bored I am. I think the fun thing with quarantine is it gave me a reason to finally hire a tutor. I use a site called italki. Again, I don't work for any of the things I've mentioned, but it's a really great tool. And if you're interested about it, about my experience, I'd love to talk about it more with you, because it's been a tool where it's an old website. It's a very popular site to find a tutor, but I just loved how it almost felt, it gave me the fix I missed of like booking a trip, because you can book time with a teacher, and when you're on that call and you're learning that language, I feel like I'm back in those countries. I'm learning Cantonese right now, and I have a great teacher in Hong Kong, and although Hong Kong is no longer potentially the Hong Kong that I remembered, I'm feeling like I'm engaging with the life that I would be having if I was there. And that's what I miss the most about travel. And that's what language really gives you. And so I chose the languages that are going to be the most relevant to me as far as where I want to spend time in the next 3 to 5 years. So obviously Turkey is going to be my base most likely. So I have every morning 9 a.m. since I have started this, or since basically April, I've done Turkish 5 to 7 days a week. And I'm seeing a lot of progress, and it's the consistency. And the teachers, sometimes it depends on what language you study, but Turkish, I have a teacher, he's $4 an hour to study, so, and we have a great time, and we have a great lesson every morning or 3 times a week with him. And then I have some other teachers, but it's a great way to use the time. And then I have a Farsi teacher who's great, and I'm doing Turkish, Farsi, and Arabic, because those 3 languages, kind of like Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, they're different. All of them are from different families, but the word basis, like in Korean and Japanese, so many words come from Chinese. And so when you're digging in, it's like, oh, the word for library sounds exactly like the word in Korean, sounds exactly like the word from Chinese. That's odd. And so Chinese and Arabic are kind of the head languages of those regions, not grammatically, but the words. And so I'm learning Arabic, and then literally Turkish and Farsi, I'd say at least 30 to 40% of the words are just straight from Arabic. So I think actually learning them together in a weird way is like helpful to me, because it helps me put the pieces together. And as long as there's at least an hour or 2 between the lesson, I don't find that I'm like, usually by the end of the lesson, I start getting tired and I end up reverting to Turkish, because it's the one that I've had the most time with. So I'm doing Turkish, Arabic, and Farsi, and then I'm doing both Mandarin and Cantonese, alternating every night. So I have Mandarin Cantonese 3 times a week, and then Mandarin twice a week. I'm doing Monday to Friday, and that's keeping me fresh with Asia, because I even miss China. Like, I mean, obviously China's gotten off the deep end, but I miss going there, so I feel like I have a piece of that when I'm learning it.
I say this in a positive sense. You have a beautiful mind. I've never gotten Cantonese past the subway announcement level that I can mimic. So I can tell you to stay back from the yellow line, but and order a few dishes. But that's all I can do.
But I came into Cantonese lesson with 0. And if you have Mandarin and you have a teacher, the teacher I have just walks me through it nice and patiently, and we just do comparison. And I was scared of Cantonese, and I was like putting it off. But I have this kind of like desire, because I'm like all into Hong Kong. Like, I want to like learn Cantonese, like for the the posterity of Hong Kong identity or whatever. But so I'm learning. I'm learning it, but it was hard getting started. But once you get past it, it's 9 tones instead of 4, so that's always fun. But it's a lot of fun. It's a great language, I think.
Oh, I envy you. I'm gonna put in the links to close a beautiful picture on your Instagram, and everybody follow Brian World of your haircut before going into lockdown in Turkey, and that's one of my great passions is getting a haircut and a shave in countries. I feel like there's no better way to open up and make friends than to trust them with a sharp razor blade to your neck.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to talk with everybody.
Well, thank you. A wonderful evening. Thank you, Brian.
Have a great night.